Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and today I want to talk about AI. Specifically, I want to compare and contrast AI, specifically large language model, AI productive content type stuff that is all the rage in 2025. And I want to compare and contrast it with a couple of other academically and perhaps morally questionable methods that AI often gets compared to. Specifically, we often hear AI referred to as, or compared closely to, a couple of things, either plagiarism or piracy. Or even accused AI, that is, being accused of simply doing plagiarism or piracy. Now, these two are very different from each other, and I'll go on to argue are also substantially different from AI, or the use of AI for content production, or whatever you want to call it. But to differentiate it, I first want to look at the difference between plagiarism and piracy. The short version of the distinction, the version that I usually wind up telling my students, is that the difference between piracy and plagiarism is citation, is accreditation, giving credit where it's due. That's because piracy is the unauthorized use of intellectual property. And I say this with a note of caution, noting that this is a positive law construction, piracy. And this is because intellectual property is not per se part of what you would call natural law. It is defined entirely by legal structures, like human constructed legal structures. The reason for this, of course, is it has to do with the scarcity of information. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on this, but for more, I will give some sources in the description that'll give some more details on what I'm talking about here. But I'll give a brief overview. Information, by its very nature, can be infinitely replicated at no cost. The fact that you are listening to my words is not taking them away from me, nor is it taking them away from the next person to watch this. What that means is that information is considered in economic terms non-scarce, and therefore non-rivalrous. It is the kind of good, that is to say, it is beneficial, it is something that we want to have, that can be acquired without depriving it from anyone else. And that means that it has functionally no cost except the cost to produce it in the first place. And once that cost is sunk, then there is no additional cost to taking or receiving the information. This is different from, say, a particular physical book, right? So, if I, for example, take a book off of my shelf. This is one of my copies of The Hobbit. I have more than one. But if I were to give this copy to you, then I would have one fewer. If instead I were to copy the information from this book, that is to say, if I were to commit piracy, if I were to violate the copyright of the Tolkien estate on The Hobbit, and I were to say, read it to you in full, for example, or I were to type it into a Word document, or if I were to write it out, or if I were to just photocopy each page and send you a PDF, I would still have this thing here, this physical book in my hand. So that is a way of differentiating between the physical product, the book itself, and the information contained within the book. Now, piracy, that is to say, copying of information, illicitly or illegally, is only malum prohibitum. That is to say, it's only wrong insofar as it is illegal, and insofar as those laws are just. Now, I tend to dispute whether those laws are just. I tend to dispute the ethics of intellectual property laws in general, but that's perhaps for another video, one that I've been promising for some time. So if it's not out, I apologize. In any case, it's important to note, the important thing for our discussion here is that what piracy is, in this case, is specifically the unauthorized or illegal copying or use of a specific set of data and the reuse of that data for unauthorized purposes. Okay. The other point of comparison that we want to look at is plagiarism. Now, plagiarism can overlap with piracy, but it needn't. A text could be still plagiarized, even if it is not pirated. Plagiarism is specifically, what is wrong with plagiarism is the dishonesty involved. This is why we in academia, especially in universities, will refer to plagiarism as academic dishonesty. That is why plagiarism is this this sort of overall catch-all term. Academic dishonesty is this overall catch-all term that includes plagiarism. So plagiarism specifically is attempting to pass off someone else's work or something that you have gotten, some information or some work or whatever that you have received, as if it had been your own work. It is essentially lying. And so this falls under the same category as, say, cheating. If you were to cheat on a test by having gotten the answer key from the professor's office or whatnot, then that would be the same sort of thing. That would be academic dishonesty. You are acting as if, you're portraying your work as if it were your own, the answers to the test in this case, or an essay if you're plagiarizing. You're portraying it as if this were your own words, your own thoughts, your own answers, whereas they actually came from somewhere else. You're lying, essentially. And that is specifically what is wrong with plagiarism. Now again, the line between plagiarism and good essay writing, or at least acceptable essay writing, not necessarily good, is citation. If I say, the source of this quote is such and such, then it isn't plagiarism. For example, if I were to claim to compose a short poem for you just now, just a quick little 4-line poem, and I were to say, sorry, let me get the book out of frame to make this somewhat more realistic. If I were to say, far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long-forgotten gold. If I were to say that I just composed a 4-line poem for you, that would be plagiarism. However, if I were to say, I will now read you a poem, a verse of a poem from The Hobbit, I've no longer plagiarized, because I've now included where it came from. I've said, this is the source, this book in particular, and this is the text from it, what I've recited above. And so the actual words on the page may be completely identical. But first of all, what I'm saying that I'm doing, and what you, the reader or the hearer or the listener, understand me to be doing, is radically different, and that's a key distinction. And then further, these can have different places in an academic context. Briefly, and as a sort of overview again, plagiarism is attempting to make something look like your own work. You're trying to use someone else's genius or inspiration or ideas as a substitute for your own. Citation is using someone else's ideas for your own further purposes, and being upfront and clear about where those ideas came from. Okay, so we've got piracy, which is the unauthorized or illicit or illegal use of someone else's information, and you have plagiarism, which is the dishonest portrayal of someone else's ideas as your own. Then we have AI, and we can perhaps see why someone might make the comparison between AI and either of these other two problematic forms of information conveyance, let's say. However, I would argue that each comparison ultimately falls flat if we understand what AI is doing, and then also if we are willing to use AI in a responsible way. Okay, so first of all, piracy. AI is very often accused of piracy because the accusation goes at least that it is either producing outputs that are so relevantly similar to an original work that it, say, used in its dataset, that original work is essentially copied with minor but insubstantial alterations, and the output is simply a pirated copy of the original with alterations that are not sufficient to, say, constitute it being transformative or covered by fair use protections or any of these other legal distinctions that YouTubers are unfortunately mostly familiar with. Now, this, of course, depends largely upon the human inputs to the AI. If I were to, for example, prompt the AI to replicate something exactly, it would almost do that. And I say almost because there are interesting examples of AI attempting to exactly copy something without changing it whatsoever, and it's incapable of doing so. And that actually does tell us something about this, that it is not simply copying inputs into its output. It is doing something, and it is essentially trying, so to speak, to replicate something rather than simply copying and pasting, so to speak. And so already we don't exactly have piracy in terms of the outputs. But you may say there's another argument. Perhaps the AI is scraping data and is using data without prior permission. Now, this may be an issue in the abstract. Right? If the information that you put out is not authorized for general use, if it is a specific use, if it has specific use clauses, say in a license or what have you, then maybe there's a case to be made here. But in most cases, AI datasets in 2025 at least, have at least, or have, for the most part, a couple of protections against this sort of thing. One source of AI data is sets of information that where the contributors to that information, that is to say people who've posted it, what have you, have explicitly in some kind of terms of use or contract clicked a box somewhere, or at least did not click deny, and have therefore given permission to use this data to train AI. Even barring that, putting out information for general use, right? So that is, for example, a simple example of this is posting a tweet or an X post or whatever. What this is essentially doing is you're putting something out there that other people can use, can read, can take in that information, and can therefore adapt. I say adapt here because by at least American IP legal protections, you can in fact use information that you've obtained in a licit and legal way. You can use it for your own purposes so long as it is transformative. And so if I include, say, a clip in my video,
isn't technology wonderful?
That is acceptable. That's protected under fair use, even if YouTube sometimes doesn't recognize that properly, but setting YouTube policies aside. That's protected under fair use protections because it transforms the original content into something new, or places it as part of some new holistic creative endeavor. This is certainly the case with respect to AI training. If you're using data to train an AI model, that data, the inputs into the training, are not themselves part of the outputs. They're forming the neural networks in the large language model that is allowing for novel outputs. It's not just taking bits and pieces of different things and recobbling them together. It is learning, so to speak, the patterns of a certain type of input such that it can produce outputs of a similar but not identical type. And so, AI is, again, barring things like illicit or illegal data acquisition, things like spying and espionage and whatnot. Barring that, AI use for training AI, I should say, is fundamentally transformative and wouldn't qualify as piracy, and again, unless it does in a very specific, special case. Now, plagiarism. This is a more interesting topic, perhaps, because one can argue that AI uses all of these inputs without accreditation, without giving credit to where it gets its inspiration from. Now, I use the term inspiration here to as a sort of intuition pump, to get you to start thinking in terms of how you think, because AI is, well, obviously not the same as human thought. It has relevant similarities. Because when you, as a human being, come up with a new idea, that new idea is largely based upon other things that you've learned in the past. It is based upon information that you have received and internalized, that has trained your way of thinking. Art is a fantastic example of this. If you learn to paint, you're going to learn certain techniques, and you're going to learn from certain people. And so you're going to be deriving inspiration, you're going to be deriving knowledge, you're going to be deriving technique from those various sources. And part of what that means, ultimately, is that you are using these sources to create something new. Now, if you would call that plagiarism, you would be well outside the academic norms. This is similar to, say, in perhaps my context, in terms of essay writing. If you do not cite every source of inspiration that you received for your, say, writing style, if you don't cite your English composition teacher or your elementary school English teacher, then you're actually writing an essay appropriately. That is not required in order to avoid plagiarism. What's required to avoid plagiarism is the specific sources for the particular bits of information that you have received in this paper, the things that you are actively using, not that you have passively internalized. And so what we see here is that the ordinary accusation of plagiarism, or AI as a plagiarism machine, or however you want to use these terms, it falls flat. Now, there is a way in which the use of AI is relevantly similar to plagiarism, and that is something that concerns me quite a bit more as an educator. And this is something that anyone who has been anywhere near an academic environment, whether as a teacher or as a student in the last 5 years or so, is unfortunately familiar with. Maybe not 5 years, but a few years. And that is, of course, passing off AI outputs as your own writing. And if essentially you type in a prompt, you say, hey, write me a paper with these stipulations, this many words on this topic, using this format or whatever. And you just copy paste the output into your paper and you hit submit. That's plagiarism. Now, even though it did not come from a particular human source, it did not come from a plagiarized source, why this is a form of plagiarism, or at least academic dishonesty, is that you are taking something that you received and claiming that you came up with it yourself. You are essentially lying to the audience typically being the professor, the teacher, the instructor, the grader, whatever. To use a comparison, if you opened, say, a Wikipedia article on the topic of your paper, and you just select all, copy, paste, submit, that's obviously plagiarism. This couldn't be a more obvious case. However, if you put quotation marks around it, and then put in your works cited Wikipedia, and then you properly cited it as a web source, that would be a terrible essay, but it would not be plagiarism. I would not, as a professor, I would not either have to or even have any reason to report you to the Office of Academic Dishonesty or anything like that. I would, of course, ask you what you were thinking and why you would think I would give you a good grade for this, but you wouldn't get the academic penalties that come with plagiarism. Because what you have done is you have used a citation, you've just used it poorly. So you have not lied. You've not tried to pass off a Wikipedia article as your own work. You have just instead pointed to a Wikipedia article and said, here, I found this. Now, that's not a good job. That's not a good paper. But it's honest. This is similar to if you were to, the difference, say, between having ChatGPT write your paper for you versus having ChatGPT write your paper for you and then having a citation generated by ChatGPT web source. Now, again, you're not going to get a good grade for this because you didn't do almost anything here. But I wouldn't report you to the Office of Academic Integrity or the Academic Dishonesty Office, depending on your institution. I would give you a poor grade, of course, but what you did was at least honest. So I think this distinction, this way of differentiating between the use of AI and plagiarism, can actually lead us to a way of responsibly using AI in an academic context. So there's a couple of ways that this can happen. One is using AI for things like research assistance, background help, using it as if you're using a search engine. Because again, you don't need to cite google.com if you, or Google Scholar maybe if you're better at this, because you searched for sources on Google. No, that's absurd. You would find the sources and cite the sources. Now, you can use ChatGPT or any of the other various large language models. You can use them for research assistance. I've done this myself on multiple occasions. And then use the information that you found via ChatGPT or whatever. And then actually cite the sources that you find, rather than trying to cite ChatGPT as your source, because it isn't your source. It's a research tool. And this is, of course, an incredibly useful tool that I think we should absolutely embrace so long as we're using it responsibly in a way that isn't dishonest, that isn't plagiarizing. Now, of course, there's another way of doing this as well. Right? And the comparison there would be to using AI like you would use a service that has been around for far longer, something like Grammarly. Right, so Grammarly, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a computerized grammar checking tool that fixes and helps to correct your grammar and whatnot in an essay, in a paper. My apologies. She was going to knock over the tripod. And so if you're going to use AI to help write your paper, I think that can be a perfectly acceptable use, so long as you are honest and upfront about what the AI did to help you write your paper. This can be as simple and straightforward as copying and pasting your AI, your final draft into the AI and saying, please check this for spelling and grammar, and report back any changes. And then you just go through any changes and you act like it's essentially Grammarly, or even just, Microsoft Word spell check. And using it as a substitute for tools that we've had for a long time, and just as a slightly more effective version of those same tools. This could also do something like serve as a proofreader, even as a content proofreader. You can put in your essay into ChatGPT, your draft, say, and ask, for example, are there any holes in this argument? Are there any criticisms to this argument that I need to consider? Can this? What are several ways in which the argument of this paper can be improved using this or that resource? And using that can be essentially the same as, say, handing it to a classmate and having that classmate say, give you advice on how to improve your paper. Now, word of caution: this is not. None of this is advice for your class. If you are in a class and you want to use AI for writing your paper, don't take my advice. Bring my advice, probably in your own words, don't plagiarize me. Take my advice to your professor or your grader and ask them if this is an acceptable use of AI in the context of their class. And it might be. The reason I can't give this as advice simply right now is because in terms of the grand scales of academia, the time scales that we're talking about here, AI is still relatively new, and academic norms are still developing around it. And so the norms for my class, my expectations in my classroom, might be radically different from the expectations in another classroom. Like, for me, I allow any use of AI as long as the student is honest and upfront about it. Any use of AI that they want to use, I will not report for academic dishonesty or anything like that, so long as they are upfront and honest about what they've done. Even if that means that they do the ridiculous thing of, I've generated this paper through ChatGPT, and they submit it, and they tell me this. They won't get a passing grade, but they won't get reported for academic dishonesty because they're being honest. This is, of course, this might vary wildly from class to class. You will probably find some professors who don't have these same reporting requirements. You'll find some professors, assuredly, who, if they find even the slightest trace of AI, will immediately report you to academic dishonesty, or for academic dishonesty, regardless of whether it's admitted or not. And so again, be careful, and make sure that you are communicating clearly about what you would like to do, what you are planning to do, and what you have permission to do. So, all of this is to, first of all, just to simply draw these comparisons to both plagiarism and to piracy, and to differentiate AI, because I am rather optimistic about the use of AI in an academic context. I think that it will absolutely have some wonderful uses, but it might take us some time to decide what those uses are, and where the borders are between licit use and illicit use, between honest and dishonest use. So, I hope this has helped you, give you some ideas of how you might want to use AI moving forward. And I hope I will have contributed a little bit to the discussion of where we as an academic community think that AI should have its place and have its role in academia. So, thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. You can go. Thanks, Angel. Thank you for participating. Hello again. Before getting out of here, I thought I would go through some things that I used in this video that were entirely AI-based, because I did actually use quite a few AI elements in this video. In fact, I'm using some of them right now. First, and probably most notable that you'll notice, my background is obviously generated by Grok over here. This is not what my library looks like, but it could be. My eye contact, my disturbing level of eye contact with you is AI generated. But then, more subtly perhaps, but at least as interestingly, there were elements of the video itself, up until this point, that were AI generated. The background music, which you may have been enjoying, or perhaps not, was also AI generated and placed in there nicely. But then perhaps more fundamentally, the topic for the video, and even the very basic outline of the subject to be discussed, was generated by YouTube's inspiration tab that actually gave me the idea for the video and how to start talking about this topic and what very basic points I needed to cover. Now, of course, I added my own points to this. Right? I elaborated on this quite a bit. I organized it myself, of course. But the general idea was generated by YouTube, by its algorithm. And it even gave me the perhaps absurd thumbnail that I wound up using for the video. Because, well, I trust YouTube to tell me what will do well on YouTube. In any case, I hope that this video has not just been an explanation of some good and licit uses of AI, but that the video itself, as well as my accreditation here at the end, provide a good example of good uses of AI in an academic context. Anyway, that's all I've got for this time. See you again.